Afternoon sessions here at the conference. Everything's been going so wonderfully, and thank you all for being here. This is, as you know, the Crafting Appalachia panel, and we have a treat. We're going to start off this session with some poetry from an Appalachian artist and activist, very beloved in Nashville, that does a lot of work. His organization is called Hood Huggers International. He does hood tours, which if you haven't been on a hood tour, put that on your to-do list, as well as doing a lot of work over many years to transform our community, creating space in the Burn Street Community Peace Gardens. So we're really lucky to have him here to kick off this panel with some poetry, get us into an artistic state of mind. So please join me in welcoming Dwayne Barton.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I was trying to think about what I was going to read to y'all today. Man, a lot of things came in my head. But because I seen a little voting thing out there when I was going through the South Side on a tour, I'm going to read y'all this joke called Wild Vote. Wild Vote. Obama, you really got us thinking about the future. Come on, baby. Obama, you really got us thinking about the future. Wild Vote. In 2000, they had us waiting, but it's always been something. Bloody, deadly, poll tax, history test, dog bites, and water hose. Abracadabra, boom! But like I said, in 2000, they had us waiting. When your decision was made, did it count? Reach its destination. Integrity, who do we trust? Did you punch too many bubbles? Did our bubbles match our candidate? Registered but can't vote. Make believe democracy. Florida resembled Firestone. Produced one bad tire. All ballots should have been recalled and recounted. Another live news conference, blue and black suits with titles, still smiling. Riddles, hands deep in pockets, tied by greed, ropes against campaign finance. Their words, the American people. While looking through a lawyer, why vote? Wages paralyzed, relentless taxes, while food and fuel prices are out of control. Still keep the police in practice. DWB, my style, the media criminalized, prison mirrors stuffed with my reflection. No black suit, straight hair, rich family, I ain't guilty. Neighborhood schools, supplies depleted. Affordable housing, a thing of the past. Gray skies, beige water, children with asthma on the rise. On the rise. Why vote? Obama, you really got us thinking about the future. Come on, baby. Obama, you really got us thinking about the future. Come on, baby. Obama, you really got us thinking about the future. Is it all about the money? Is it all
thank you all for joining us for this afternoon's panel, Crafting Affrilachia. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Marilyn Zapp, and I'm the Assistant Director and Curator at the Center for Craft, which is a national arts nonprofit headquartered in downtown Asheville, and the sponsor for this afternoon's panel discussion. For over 20 years, the Center for Craft has worked to advance the understanding of craft in higher education, museums and cultural institutions, and across disciplines in order to increase the value and relevance of craft to society. Each year, we award over $300,000 to emerging craft artists, established craft artists, scholars, and curators across the country. In addition, we organize exhibitions and programs at our downtown Asheville gallery, and I cordially invite you all to join us for a current exhibition in Times of Seismic Sorrows, which is a two-person show exploring themes of climate change through crafted objects. So as you may know, craft is a prevalent part of Appalachia's cultural heritage and contemporary identity. From the early Cherokee artisans to the craft revival and more recently the studio craft movement, this region is known nationally and internationally as a center for craft production. And yet, the presence of Black and brown craft artists is rarely acknowledged in the dominant historical craft narratives. The lack of Black and brown visibility in craft is not only an Appalachian phenomenon. As scholar Jenny Sorkin recently reminds us, studio craft, as a history, has privileged white, middle class, and largely male artists, sustaining its own forms with traditions that are borrowed, stolen, and appropriated from the poor, indigenous, and for people of color whose own systems of production were destroyed or altered by colonization. Craft is a raft. Try to climb aboard, but it's slippery and it flips over frequently. It's a good time to start building the boat anew. Today is a chance for us to work on a new boat, a different, sturdier, more inclusive kind of craft. After all, craft has played a significant role in the social and cultural history of the African American experience and vice versa. Our panel today joins other recent initiatives to challenge the status quo of studio craft, including grassroots efforts to provide financial support and networks to Black and brown craft artists, such as the recently founded Artists of Color Caucus, as well as a growing cohort of curators and scholars who are revising and reclaiming African American craft histories and contemporary practices, such as Camille Ann Brewer, Adrienne Childs, Anna Fariello, Faith Davis Ruffins, and our moderator today, Marie T. Cochran. This afternoon, we've come together to consider the work of three contemporary Appalachian craftspeople, documenting how their practice impacts their identity, community, and cultural history, thereby beginning to shift the cultural narrative around who makes what and where. Before we begin, however, thanks are in order, and on behalf of the Center for Craft, I would first and foremost like to thank WNC Asheville for their leadership in hosting this important convening, particularly Dr. Waters, who was instrumental in providing connections and building relationships that have fed into today's panel. Also thanks to Amy Worthen for her support and guidance in the conference organization, and to our moderator, Marie Cochran, for bringing her expertise to bear on the field of craft. Thanks also are in order for J.D. Harrison, Sharon Jones, and Viola Spells, our panelists today, for sharing their craft stories with us. And finally, thanks to you all for coming out on your Saturday for this important conference. We're very grateful to be a part of it. I am now going to introduce our moderator, Marie Cochran, who's going to introduce you to our panelists. Marie Cochran was born and raised in Toccoa, Georgia. Almost. I'm going to give you a formal introduction. Marie Cochran was born and raised in Toccoa, Georgia, a small rural town in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. The granddaughter of sharecroppers and the daughter of a textile factory worker, she grew up listening to the stories of ordinary people, which instilled in her a desire to honor their struggles in the vernacular of her own work as an artist, educator, and curator. Cochran earned a BFA in drawing and painting from the University of Georgia, and an MFA in mixed media from the School of the Art Institute, Chicago. She has held faculty positions in a number of educational institutions in Georgia, Maryland, New Jersey, and North Carolina. As a visual artist, Cochran has received acclaim for her mixed media pieces with themes ranging from cultural memory to social justice. Selected exhibition venues include the High Museum of Art in Atlanta, Georgia, the Lyndon Johnson Presidential Library and Museum in Austin, Texas, the former Center for African American History and Culture at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., and the Studio Museum of Harlem in New York. Cochran is the founding curator of the Affrilachian Artist Project, which celebrates the intersection of cultures in Appalachia, specifically nurturing a network of African American creatives and welcoming anyone committed to the sustainability of a diverse region. Please join me in welcoming Marie T. Cochran.
Stacey Abrams, you gotta thinking about the future. Stacey Abrams. Hey, Ashe.
Ashe.
I am so honored and blessed to be here today, and I'm going to say there's not going to be anything stuffy about our panel. We're going to have a wonderful conversation with each other, and I see so many wonderful people who are representing the arts community, social justice communities, grassroots organizations, that we can't go wrong on this, because we've got a wonderful audience that matches this fabulous panel that we have. But I know that some of you may not know what this term Affrilachia means, so I've got to give you a little 5-minute video just to get us priming the pump and hearing the Carolina chocolate drops and getting us back to that point where it all began. So help me with the tech, because I don't want to blow anything up, because I'm like, fire! Okay, yeah, we'll go ahead and start. And you'll see me with less gray hair up on the screen. So I'm going to walk to the back.
We're all here because of the fact that we are undervalued, you know, as artists, and we're always looked up. We're secondary.
We're told that we would best consider jobs to become pipe fitters or something more practical. This is one. There's a white professor that told us that.
She said, honey, colored people can't be artists.
Just having that kind of support within the family unit made it so that when I experienced opposition from outside, I already had the armor I needed to deflect that.
In 5th grade, in Miss Trophy's class, when we had to stand up and say what we wanted to be when we grew up, I took that challenge and I stood up and said I want to be an artist when I grow up. So all the kids had laughed at recess. That's what I couldn't play with them anymore. I played with people who believed in me.
I've always been a creative person, but never really had a chance to really express myself. Something like being there, you know, but people really don't have that big of appreciation for art and stuff.
My name is Marie Cochran, and I was born and raised in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. I am an Affrilachian artist. 20 years ago, a group of writers, black writers from Kentucky, coined the term Affrilachia. 2 years ago at a gathering, it occurred to me that musical groups like the Carolina Chocolate Drops had embraced the term. There was a word, there was a song, but where were the visual artists? Frank X. Walker, a founding member of the Affrilachian Poets, extended his hand across the table, and he said, "You invite them." And that was when my journey began. 2 years later, I've curated an exhibition of Affrilachian artists at the August Wilson Center in Pittsburgh. The name of the show is Common Ground Affrilachia, where I'm from. This particular exhibition brings together 31 artists of various ages working in a variety of media. Affrilachia identifies the African presence in these mountains. For too long, the contribution of African Americans to American culture has been neglected. Until recently, our contribution to Appalachian culture has been denied. For instance, how many folks know that the banjo, which is so integral to Appalachian music, has African roots? The Affrilachian Visual Artist Project was created to showcase the artwork. The exhibition represents the completion of the first phase. In the next phase, I feel a sense of urgency Many of the artists are over the age of 60.
Oh, my name is Viola.
Green Davis, what is Green Davis?
I'm Jackson. I'm looking at Rainy. I'm Elizabeth Ash Douglas.
I'm Errol Butchie, Ubuntu Reynolds.
Charlotte Cobb.
It's Joanne Bates, Valeria Watson-Deuce.
My name is Sammy Lewis Nicely.
How do you feel about being a part of this exhibition with all of us?
Honored, because they're pioneers. We felt so isolated. At the time, we didn't know what being Davis. We didn't know people were, especially African-American artists. I always introduced at a conference in Texas. And I thought, wow, we're not the only ones. There's somebody out there in the world that's living, thriving as an artist.
They are the pioneers who have overcome racial prejudice and other barriers. It's time to give these artists the recognition that they so richly deserve.
And it makes us feel like, wow, there's somebody out there that we can look up to, and pretty soon we're gonna have to pass that baton on to someone else. I didn't make it by myself. We had other people that supported us along the way.
I need your support to take this next step so that I, along with my team, can travel to the places where these artists live and work to capture their life story. This will begin the process of creating an archive of Affrilachian artists. Do you agree that African American cultural traditions or contributions are undervalued? Are you surprised to learn about the rich literary, musical, and visual arts traditions in Appalachia? If you answered yes to any of these questions, then you owe it to yourself to make a pledge. I thank you on behalf of all the future generations of Affrilachian artists.
So this was the front page of their free paper in Pittsburgh about the show. And there's so many stories that could be told about that, but I primarily wanted to give you a sense of where I started and also to keep myself honest, because we were talking about the work that we're doing in communities. That was a promotional video that I made for a Kickstarter campaign that was not successful. Little did I know that unless you raise all the money, you get none of the money. But what that film did for me in putting that online was connect me to people all over the region. And I got all these different connections and speaking engagements based on that being out there. Because the majority of the artists that you saw in that video were from the Pittsburgh area, but Valeria Watson was in the video, but Dwayne Bart was also in the exhibition. There were artists from Georgia, there were artists from Kentucky, there were artists from Tennessee and West Virginia. But you can see how sometimes as a scholar, you have to pick up the torch, and I have to go back and make that documentary. As an artist, I also came back from that experience and realized that there were a lot of different directions that I could have gone. I could have continued to have exhibitions all over the country with a variety of artists in those venues, but something would not let me do that because I kept thinking about the community that people belong to. And I realized that in my own life, I never made a distinction between so-called fine art, let's do it the way it's done, so-called fine art and craft. And we're going to be addressing that issue today. So you may have some questions about this whole notion of Affrilachia, but I wanted to give attribution first. Our focus is on the panel for today, but we will mix in those questions afterwards. So for today, we have three outstanding artists with us. We have J.D. Harrison, we have Sharon Jones, we have Viola Spells. And yes, And y'all, I got the Carolinas for you. Not all North Carolina. 2 of the people are South Carolinians, so a little bit of shout out for the region as we talk about Western North Carolina and Southern Appalachia. I'm going to read really quickly over okay, you've already seen that. That gives you a general wonderful quote from the book, The United States of Appalachia by Jeff Biggers. So there's all these wonderful sources that we can go to talk about the diversity in the region. We just left this wonderful panel about Allen School and Nina Simone. He talks about Nina Simone in that book. He mentions Bill Withers in that book. There's lots of stuff we go on to say, but we're as diverse as the terrain. But I'm going to start with each presentation by giving you a look at their business card, because these are artists who are making their livelihood from their work. This is rare. This is super rare for people of color. And they will be talking about what that experience is for them as we do our conversation. They're sitting here so they can see what the PowerPoint looks like, and I'm going to bring them onto the panel in just a minute. But this is J.D. Harrison. J.D. Harrison was born in Anderson, South Carolina, and has been an architecture professional for 23 years, working with award-winning architectural firms, designers, and builders in Greenville, North Carolina, and Charlotte, North Carolina. Greenville, South Carolina, and Charlotte, North Carolina. This experience provided a solid foundation in understanding the art of the design and build process. Since 2010, J.D. Harrison has been the owner, designer, artist of Studio H Designs, a design studio focusing on residential design. The intent is to constantly incorporate and evolve the home with its natural surroundings. CR8 Sustainable Furnishings was created shortly thereafter, serving as the artisan furniture build and specialty installation side of Studio H Designs based in Greenville. CR8 is where the creative mind and skilled hands come together to create unique pieces which often feature reclaimed and salvaged materials. Each piece has a story to tell, and this budding brand continues to extend its reach into multiple creative areas. I'm going to show you just a few examples of their work. And in this kind of presentation, it doesn't do their work any justice. Why? Because it's three-dimensional. So I'm going to ask him if he would, he can tell us a little bit about what we're seeing in those few examples that I've chosen. And he can just briefly point some things out and maybe tell us the location of what those projects are.
Can everyone hear me?
You know, you can take, I think, one of the mics from. I'm causing all kinds of chaos with the documentation in this.
Is that better?
Panel. There you go.
Yeah. In this slide here, the image in the far upper left corner, this was my first commercial commissioned piece. It's hard to tell scale in the image, but that table is 3 inches thick, 5 feet wide, and 10 feet long.
Wow.
That was for a clothing design company that's based in Greenville, but they've got a global reach. And my intent with this piece was to tie as much of their history to this piece as well as to the future of the company. So being that they had a textile background, I incorporated the top, which was reclaimed flooring from a mill floor, and the base, which weighs about 1,500 pounds. But it looks very light in this picture, and that was the intent, but it's shaped this way to show kind of that fabric and the connection and how that is part of the foundation of this company. And the only thing that they told me in creating this piece was, if our fabric gets snagged, it's worthless to us. So, have fun. And so, haven't heard any negative feedback yet, so all things are good. The steel door here, that was with that same company. That door is again, it's about 9 feet tall and 6 feet wide and 3 inches thick. The handle on that door is significant because that came from a plantation in Newberry. And I had that salvaged from another project that I had worked on and wanted to incorporate that into this piece. So, very proud of these as being the first, commercial installation, and that has moved me on to do their second installation when they expanded, and I've such done 3 more corporate offices since this one.
Here's the next one.
Oh, same company. The far right wall, that is essentially this ceiling wall, but just inverted. So you're looking at about 30 foot tall, and then there's probably a 6-foot cantilever. 3 of all reclaimed materials, ranging in size from 2x8s down to 2x2s, and just sort of arranged in a pattern that, again, I felt was reflective of the company itself. The desk to the left, that was my very first piece. All the wood material in that piece came from that plantation house in Newberry. So still today it stands as my favorite piece, but it's modern in its design, but telling in its story. There were nails that were imprinted into the wood that I incorporated back into the piece. Because for me, the history is the biggest portion of it, and there's storytelling in every piece that I do. And it's not so much to talk about the past, but how the past can be woven and make an impact in our present and the future.
And last but not least.
Same company. This was their, when they expanded into their second space about 1.5 years after the initial installation. So I came in and I designed this, their front entry piece here on the left, which incorporated metal and wood. And in the second image, that was one of their sitting spaces that incorporated, again, the reclaimed material, but we incorporated some furniture pieces to try to have that intimate and cozy feel.
All right. Next up is going to be Sharon. I'm going in alphabetical order. Oh, that's signature piece. All right. Oh, and I'm sorry, don't even have, you can rest for a while. I've got to read about you. Sharon Jones is an artist, engineer, and entrepreneur. Born and raised in Seattle, Washington, she holds bachelor's and master's degrees in ceramics and material science engineering from the University of Washington. After 18 years of research, she achieved a U.S. patent for Corning Incorporated and multiple invention disclosure awards at Hughes Aircraft. A desire for a major career shift inspired Sharon to launch SJ Studios, LLC, where she is owner-operator designing and creating handmade decorative ceramic tiles. As part of her training, she joined the construction crew as a tile setter's helper for 1 month, followed by 2 years in the Brick and Allied Craft Workers Trade School, learning how to install tile. As a full-time designer and maker, Sharon satisfies her dual interest in technical challenges and creative vision. Sharon has been on the South Carolina State's Arts Council roster of approved artists since 2009. Her largest and most extensive mosaic project is a 17-foot Tilton Park mural in Wilmington, Delaware, 2002, composed of 2,300 handmade tiles dedicated by Mayor James Baker. Her most recent collaborative public art project is the Church Street mural, Church Street Heritage Park in 2017 for the city of Anderson, South Carolina, which honors its historic African American business district. Last year, Sharon also received a commission to design and create a mosaic for the University of South Carolina Williams-Brice Football Stadium Presidential Suite. Sharon Jones.
Can everybody hear me? Yes. So, she said 17 feet, it's 75 feet. If it had been 17 feet, I would have made some money.
She's right, my bad.
That's okay. So one of the things I thought about was when she mentioned about the patent, one of the reasons I decided to become an entrepreneur was because that patent saved Corning millions of dollars, and I got a $2 bill framed saying, "Isn't it wonderful to be a scientist?" with a quote from Thomas Jefferson. And I thought, if I can do that for that company, can I not put that same ingenuity and creativity to work for myself? And it's been, I'm not gonna lie, it's been really tough. I mean, it's been extremely tough. So it's much harder than engineering, because when you go to school, you come out of school, you get a job, and once you get that job and a decent salary and an automatically deposited paycheck, insurance is taken care of, you're not thinking about who's running for office, you're concerned with solving your company's problems. So this project resulted after one of my first commissions was to do some tile for a woman in the Bahamas. And it just so happened that that woman worked for the city of Wilmington, Delaware. She was an African-American woman. And being from Seattle, I talk like I do, which is on the phone, people don't necessarily know that I'm black. And so I didn't know that she was black. I was on the road, I-95, going to South Florida, and we started talking to each other. She had seen my website, liked my artwork, wanted me to do a commission, and she asked me, do I do multicultural tiles? And I said yes, and so through that conversation, she found out that I was black, and so immediately her concern was what was going to be the quality of my work. And so it was interesting, she was so impressed that I made this liner of tiles for her place in Florida that she got me this commission to do this for the city of Wilmington.
I'm going to go on to a detail real quick so that they can see the work.
Okay. This mural is reflecting historical and cultural facts from the state of Delaware, the city of Wilmington. And part of the trouble or difficulty in this project was, well, how do you pick which culture that you're going to depict? How do you take 75 feet and then capture, all of these historic facts? So as an engineer, I put in some technical facts. I was teaching an industrial operations class at Troy County Technical College, and so you can't see it in this particular slide, but there are steel smelting furnaces and all kinds of really interesting technical stuff in this mural. So I'm really proud of this project. And then one thing I will say also is that you also can't see from here, but on one side of the park is a kind of gang-infested, drug-infested is probably not a good word when you're talking about people, but there's problems on one side of the park, and then there's a whole different culture on the other side of the park, where they've got community gardens. It's a more upscale neighborhood, but they're separated by a very small distance, and this mural is right in between the two. And a couple months ago, some vandals spray painted all over the park, but they didn't touch the mural. And when I put this mural in, I was there physically helping with the installation, and I go back, every other year or so and try to keep it clean. But I talk to the people that are walking by me. So I kind of felt that community outreach through art and through just talking to every person that walked by, that they feel some ownership with that mural. So, but I know we can go on.
This is the Church Street project.
Okay, this is the Church Street project. This is Mayor Terrence Roberts and Councilwoman B. Thompson, we call her. And this was an interesting project. Church Street was like Beale Street, and it was a thriving black, African-American business district. This project, there you see the three of us in the brochure. Scott is the far left, Joshua Davis with the dread, and then there's me. This project was designed by Scott. He's an architect. He designed the park. He designed all the imagery in the murals. And as a tile maker, I fabricated the tiles. That was a difficult project because I had very little design input. And Joshua came into the project as actually a jury, a member of the jury panel, because there's some sculptures involved. But the only reason I'm bringing that up is because this mural was intended to commemorate an African American business district, and there was very little involvement from the African American artists.
And we're going to talk a little bit about that in detail, because one of the things that we had even discussed as I put this panel together is to talk reality about what this experience is as creative people, you know, working for people who have commissioned or brought us into projects at various stages. So go ahead.
And one of the things I want to say, can you go back one more for just 1 second? Where it says LISC, you'll hear me talk about that, and that's a very important organization with regards to fundraising for creative placemaking. And so that LISC, that's what I'm talking about. They were one of the, because that's an NEA grant. That project was funded through the National Endowment for the Arts. And there it is again. And I put this picture together because the two out of the 7 feet, well, it's actually 20 feet, 7 feet times 3 panels. And the fish sandwich was my creative design, and the dancing woman was my creative design. And pretty much everything else was the architect. So out of that whole project, that's really my artistic contribution. So it puts me in a really weird position, and I'll talk more about that later. This is just an example of, I do trees a lot in my tiles, and the reason I'm kind of showing that, because as a Black artist, and coming from an engineering background, I really didn't know how to do art, and I didn't really know that. I really went into tile because I like construction. So I make tiles, but I really like the whole aspect of construction. So, so trees were an example of how I could make tiles that would be installed in just, because when I thought about what are people going to put on their home, on their walls permanently, they're not necessarily going to put art on the wall permanently behind their stove. So this is an example of more of something what I would do for a kitchen. And there's some of my figurative works.
I think that might be the last slide.
Okay.
Hold on just a second. Yes. Yeah. And remember, we're just looking at a sampling. We needed film for each of these artists, quite honestly. That's next, hopefully. All right. Next up is Viola Spells, whose sculptural, crochet, wire designs are sometimes lacy and sometimes fiercely avant-garde. She grew up in Asheville, and as this wonderful synergy that we have going, she actually went to Allen, as you may have seen her stand in our brunch earlier. She began a career as a librarian, which her career took her to New York City to the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in Harlem. Then to the Hunter Library at Western Carolina University, where I taught at one point. And finally to Philadelphia, where Spells headed the city's largest regional public library. While in Philadelphia, Spells' daughter took a jewelry making class at the private school she attended. And on Parent Day, this is a quote from her, she said, "I walked in and thought, oh my God, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life," end quote.
Wow.
But it wasn't until she retired from library work that she found time to pursue that interest. After completing a BFA in metals at East Tennessee State University, Spells purchased a house in Asheville, returned to the city to be near her ailing mother, and considered basing her business. And Zenobia Studios is named after her mother. But with renovating, she said, I couldn't do any art. So I decided I'll just go where all the other arts are, to the River Arts District. And Spells was the first tenant in the Pink Dog Creative Building, and after a few moves, found herself back in the same location, crafting artwork to adorn the body. Viola Spells.
One of my first pieces, the necklace, the balls, and the bracelet is one of my first pieces of the ball necklace and bracelet and the ball earrings. This is also crochet wire piece with my own. I do my own gem mix with special gems and glass beads, and I do various colors. So this one has a lot of mother of pearl, anything white go into that mix. This is copper base wire with turquoise beads and a metal that started out as a flat sheet, what we call represent and chase metal, the leaf. The white piece I call Miss Ann. It's my idea, very lacy, da-da-da, kind of jewelry. And the other piece was, I wanted to come up with something different that I did with balls instead of the big balls. So I did a lot of little balls and just had multi-strands of the balls. This piece, you might see if you go into the River Arts District. It's on the flag out near the Pink Dog. It's one of the first complicated pieces that I did. It takes about a week to do this piece because each strand is put in individually. I don't really have a name as such for it because I have them in different colors, black and white, browns, autumn colors. And if you come to my studio, you'll see.
Let's all adjourn to the panel so we can sit down and have a conversation. I hope you don't change your mind. I hope you don't change your mind that they say that they've given us 15 more minutes, and we're going to use every minute of that time. So the first natural question to ask everyone is, how did you get started? I gave some stories, some indication of how people began, but were there other artists in your world, other creative people? Because one of the things, just making the leap from this show that was at the August Wilson Center to work that has a practical application that is considered craft. What led you to that? And anybody can go first.
Well, I would say the experience with my daughter was really the kickoff, but other things that happened before that, my grandmother crocheted, my mother crocheted, I crocheted as a Girl Scout. I meandered, and when I got my graduate degree for library school, that was the first chance I had to actually shop, because before your mother sent you to downtown and you got one thing and you came back home. So I never did any really shopping, so I went to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and I got to walk around and look at all the little shops, and I thought, wow, I saw all these cute little brooches, like they were so surreal and very creative. I said, this is what I love to do during the, all day. But where does one go to learn that? I had no idea until I walked into my daughter's studio jewelry class and thought, oh my God, here it is. Oh, it is.
I think for me it was, and I'm trying to remember to make sure I have the question right. How did we get started, or why?
How or why?
Well, I mentioned the thing about engineering, but what was really, I used to watch this show called Trauma, Life in the ER. I don't know if anybody's seen that, but there was one particular surgeon that was the head surgeon in Vegas. And I remember him saying that he was an auto mechanic, he was a construction worker, and then he went back to medical school, and now he's the head surgeon in Vegas, and on weekend he works for NASCAR, and he loves the fact that he can fix the car or the driver. And I thought, wow, you know, that's awesome to be able to, and it made me realize I only have one life, and I have one life to try to do whatever it is I'm gonna do, whatever statement I'm gonna make. And the other thing I remember was that by Sunday, when I was working for Corning, on Sunday, I would start to get depressed, and I realized I hated being on schedule. I'm usually running late, as you know, looking, where's Sharon?
You made me look good.
Well, yeah, that's all. But so I was walking into the plant, and if you've ever seen any of those movies about the afterlife, and you see all the drones, you know, marching in the underworld, that's what it looked like, people walking into the plant Monday morning, coming along this half-mile walk into the plant, and everybody was walking with their heads down, and I thought, man, and this was right after I had seen that episode of Trauma, Life in the ER, and I thought, if I don't leave this job, then I'm not gonna ever have another experience in my life. So I left, and I basically left without a plan, but thankfully I did get severance. I got my pink slip, and I got the patent at the same time. So that was very strange. You know, they handed me 2 slips. And what I realized, I had outgrown my job. And I started to realize that, and then I'm glad I didn't know anything when I left, because I probably wouldn't have left. And because the next, however many years were really tough. I went to Florida, and I started with, I was working at Home Depot. I was going to the trade school, and that's a whole really cool story that I don't have time to talk about, but learning a trade and learning to work with my hands was one thing, and then learning the business end was another thing, and then learning how to sell was another thing. And I realized that as an engineer, I probably wasn't that good at selling, but I really had needed to be good at selling, because I was selling my ideas at Corning, and then as doing this, I just realized that I just never have ever lost the desire to learn. The tile business is just one of my businesses, and I see myself as an entrepreneur and crafter more than an artist. And so that's probably a good answer.
And for me, started when I was young. I like to draw. How's that? Is that better? All right. I like to draw from a young kid. My parents would encourage it. My mom worked in radiology, so she would bring home the x-ray blanks and just say, here. And so I had unlimited canvas. My grandmother, she told me from a young age that
We knew this was gonna happen. We talked about this last night, all of us.
we did.
This is real.
She told me that I was born on an odd sign on an odd day, and I was going to grow up to do odd things. And little did she know. And she said she wasn't sure if she would be able to be here to see it, but she felt it. And having encouragement like that, you can't stop. You can't. And going out there, and despite what society may throw at you, knowing that you can come home and you've got that, it gives you the strength to go back out there tenfold. And so, through that foundation, it just propels me every day. And so that's, sky's the limit for me now, I feel. So whether it's design and residential or furniture or public art, I feel like I have the capacity to make it happen.
And to add to that, how did I make the transition from being an artist to doing what I'm doing now is, I'm bad with quotes, but Toni Morrison basically said that she writes the book she wanted to read. So I wanted to create my own creative family. So when I got to North Carolina, and you got the gist of it, I finally understood, oh, okay, I'm not just rural, I'm in Appalachia. And I know there are other creative people like me. So I met Viola just recently. We did the interview on the state of things, so go check it out, October 12th with Frank Station, and that was the first time we met. But I met this gentleman like 5 or 7 years ago in Asheville. And at that time, I said, oh, we were looking at a table at some place, and we came in at the same time. We said, oh, I want to get in, I want to work with you one day. So I collect people. I'm a curator of these creative people. And I think more than anything, and then of course I met Sharon through another young artist that I came to know and found out about the Church Street Project. So we're all here to say, even as we talk about this place where we are, and I will, later on we'll ask about how place might impact the world. There are people of color doing things everywhere. And I always say that even though we have small numbers, we have huge impact. So, with that said, I was really interested in looking at artists who were artisans, who worked in crafts, because I said this over and over again, as a first generation college student, I admire self-taught artists and artists who learn from their grandparents in various other ways, just as much as somebody who might go to the School of the Art Institute and get an MFA. So, my question is, how do each of you address this whole notion of, and everybody knows what I'm talking about, the fine art crafts debate? Or do you?
I would, I think I answered that question for myself recently when I was at the library looking at American Artist Magazine and American Craft. And I remember that I was really trying to define myself for some work I was doing on my website, and I remember just thinking, well, let me just figure out if I'm an artist or if I'm a crafter. And if I am a crafter, is that okay? And so when I was looking at the magazines, I just remember that when I opened the American Craft magazine, I was like, I love this magazine. And I knew right then that that was me and that was fine. And I was really okay with it because I really like that entrepreneurial spirit of, picking yourself up by the bootstraps and making it, and that's what I feel like is represented by being a craftsperson.
That's a tough one. But I think my technique probably is as a craft, but when I make something, I shoot for fine art. I went to school to get a BFA. I was taught how to make fine art, and that's what I shoot for.
I would echo that same thing. I don't really do labels. So as is that better? So as from fine art or craft, I think art is subjective. I make a piece and I allow the owner or the person who looks at it to decide for themselves. But I go with the emotion through it and making sure that I make contact with the person that it was commissioned for and leave the rest for everyone else to make their opinion.
Well, I'm going to bring in a friend of mine now, and quote her. She was unable to make it today, but this is a quote from Anna Ferriello, who's a wonderful artist in her own right and a craft scholar. This is what you guys can use now if you want to. Art, and this is her words now, I'm trying. Art is vision with or without skill, and craft is skill with or without vision. So really it's the intent. Because even in terms of vision, that's message or whatever you might want to say. But as we know, you didn't talk about what we see in art magazines, and I have an MFA, but sometimes there's an emptiness there that's not quite as substantial. I'm going to show my bias even with my MFA. As a craft, handcrafted thing that you can actually admire for its beauty and use and have in your daily life instead of like up there. They all have their different purposes, but that's just something for everybody to think. Art, Anna Ferriello. Art is vision with or without skill. Craft is skill with or without vision. All
Can I
right.
add one thing there? And I think one thing I did also realize is that I'm a business person first. And so I started asking myself, if the customer is saying, what's in it for me, what's my answer to them? So I came up with a new tagline for SJ Studios, which is a smile in every creation. So that each person, when I send that tile to them, or that mosaic, that when they get that and they open it, they feel like, wow, that's really neat. Then I've done my job.
Do we have any questions out there in the audience? Burning questions that might just hit your mind?
I'm just wondering, how can we get together more often?
I'm gonna be talking to Darren Waters back there about that. I'm just taking him away from a conversation. We do need to do, I mean, you can see how, this is the 5th anniversary of this conference, how it's building. Because one of the things that I love about what UNCA has done is that this is not strictly an academic forum for presentations. These are real practitioners with real issues, people in the community that can interact with them. As I said before, all the people that I see in the audience, and I don't want to start naming names because I'll feel like some of those people that have to name all these dignitaries, everybody could stand up. But, you know, because we do have people who are not practitioners, who are in the audience, who come in and listen to all of us. We've had everything from historical background presentations, archival presentations. And, you know, I wish we could have these like every month. But it really, we were talking about resources earlier. You know, this is something for us to consider when we talk about National Endowment for the Humanities grants. Other types of support to, whether it be have us do live broadcasts from people's studios. I'm freestyling right now. Those are the things that I think about when I'm driving on the road on 441 between Georgia and North Carolina, because I see these connections. When I go to West Virginia, when I go to Kentucky, when I go to Tennessee, and a lot of us as artists of color, I just have to speak for this moment since we're in this context. For instance, we don't see distinctions between those categories because any of these artists could do a backsplash or a public art piece, or a sculpture, or earrings, or a sculpture, or a kitchen rehab, based on the client, based on what their heart desire tells them. I'm gonna put this effort into this project because it means so much to them. We were talking till way into the early hours in the morning about the fact that everybody hold up your hands. Hey, everybody hold your hands up. Both of your hands. This is what makes their work. That physical labor of their hands. Well, that's pretty amazing. When you, and I'll also talk about the fact, you know, we talked about earlier, even with Dwayne's poem, about, we talk about freedom, and I said this in the public radio interview, it just hit me. You know, being an artist is the ultimate freedom. Now, this may be another question we can segue into, talking about challenges you faced. The thing that is a little bit different about fine artists versus craft artists, artisans, and it's fluid, is the client. So do you think that your work is, okay, how do you deal with the work being guided by the client? Is that one of the challenges that you face, facing the work?
Well, with client, I used to try to listen to what it is that they really want, but I make sure I put my touch on it.
I'm only laughing because I have clients and then I have expensive clients. And the what I call the expensive clients are the ones where they're not so clear about what they want. And I'm doing custom kitchens and bathrooms. And so I need that client to know what they want, because there are certain words I don't want to hear at the end of the job, which is, I thought you were going to fill in the blank, and that means money. It's money or time for me. So, so I have a very strict, process that I use, and I get a certain sign off. And once I get that sign off, then I do have creative license in the process. But and if a client tries to dictate too much, then the price goes up. And if they dictate too much, then there's a point where I know that I can't work with that person, and I have turned people away, saying we just can't work together.
Because sometimes they envision themselves as the designer. They just want yes, but I just listen quietly. They always like what they get in the end.
And for me, I guess, my clients, I usually start with a conversation. I never ask them what they want. Tell me your story. Because from that, I will start to depict images, and it always hits home. And so for me, that allows them to have a say in the creative process without saying, I want this. I found a way to incorporate that in a way that maybe they didn't think that it could be done. And so I think that's where the art side of it comes in for me.
Actually, this is simultaneous, so I'm gonna go to the person I know first, and then the person in front. All right, Robert Hooper, go for it.
As artists, do you all deal with drought in terms of your creativity? I mean, and if you do, what do you do to get out of that period of, drought with respect to your own creativity?
So he's saying, what do you do with drought, with the creative block when you're stuck?
I unplug.
Sorry?
I said I unplug. I'm an avid outdoors person. I will strap on a backpack and a pair of boots and I will disappear for a week, 2 weeks, a month. So for me, it's important when everybody is pulling something from you that you take time to give back to yourself, and whatever that means. And don't be apologetic. Don't apologize for it, because you need that, because you're putting so much out. So for me, that's what I do. I will just push back away from everything and give myself that time to get recharged and re-energized, and then come back.
Sharon mentioned that when a client found out that you were Black, that she was concerned about the quality. So that's a great question within the craft space, and as an artist, what limits do you experience every day or in significant ways that impact your ability to create, or the perception of your ability to create?
Did everybody here in the back? No. Okay, let me just, to rephrase, he was saying, responding to a comment that Sharon made about how when the person found out after talking to her on the phone that she was African American, there was some question about the quality of the work, and how did she respond to that, if that's a continuing issue. And actually, I think anybody on the panel might want to respond to that as well.
Well, one thing, I was used to it for being an engineer. So there, I always had to prove myself. Women in general, I think in technology, especially working with certain people from certain countries that just flat out, my college office mates were from Korea, and I remember taking the very same classes, and the guy that I shared my office with, one day we had a conversation about his perception of women. And he made it very clear in a friendly dialogue that we were having, that I asked him, I said, we're taking the same classes from the same professors. I probably have better grades than you. Why is it that you cannot, is it because I'm Black or is it because I'm female? And he said, for sure it's because I'm female. And so I've been used to dealing with that. And what I do now is, I just kind of, it doesn't really impact me anymore, and I think it's because I've changed how I see myself. And the more I know about my craft, the more I practice, the less I have to deal with that. And when I was in Florida, there was a guy that I was telling this story the other day where I had a table out at a crafts fair, and a white gentleman complained that my work wasn't black enough. And I was kind of wondering what he was looking for, and it was really an important question because because this is part of the thing about distinguishing between craft and art. Because I noticed that a lot of times with art, it's telling a really painful, powerful story, and my work, with the tree, it's not really doing that. So I started to doubt, am I an artist because my art wasn't scaring me, So I thought, well, I can't be an artist because it's not that intense. So it's an ongoing thing, and it's really interesting. I mean, people come up to your booth, and I was at the National Black Arts Festival in Atlanta with a white guy in my booth. And black people were coming up, looking at my handmade tiles and asking Tim in the back, so who makes this stuff? Yeah, that was my reaction. So it hits you at all times in different ways, and some of it's good and some of it's, but you just gotta laugh. I mean, you really do. But the main thing I would say to deal with it is building my confidence, and that's really, because what I realize is that if I have doubt, then the customer's gonna have doubt. And when I'm going into somebody's home, especially a really expensive brand new home, and I know that what I'm gonna put in there is gonna be permanent, I really have to walk in with confidence. And I also notice by interacting with salespeople myself, that if I interact with an insecure salesperson, I notice how I feel. I don't, you sure this car's got 4 wheels? So that kind of thing. I know how I feel, and I realize that what my experience with an insecure salesperson is not what I want to do with my client, and that's really helped my business a lot.
I want to make a little segue though, because I know we're pressed for time. Let's go ahead and say, unless you have a burning question, I'm looking at your smiling faces. Okay, in the back, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to, for you to speak to the financial gain or strain of your work. Gain or strain?
That's an interesting question. Anybody can take that one. What are you really asking about, like the fluctuation in their cash flow, or?
Yes.
Okay.
And livelihood and being able to live.
Make a living? Okay.
Work.
So she's asking you to address this perception, and I guess we could have said this about, being a starving artist.
Yes. Oh, that starving artist. Well, I've said that multiple times during the times that I've spoken that it's been tough, and when I'm talking tough, it's about cash flow. It's about, and what I realized, and I'll just sum it up, is it was attitude. So I've been doing this basically, I left engineering in 1999, and I've been doing this basically since 2001, and this is the first, I would say the last 3 months has been the first time in all that time that I've actually been able to make it on my art. And there are a couple reasons. One, during that time I was basically married to a carpenter. We had a wood shop, we did cabinets. Those cabinet jobs brought in so much more money that I basically stepped away from the tile work. He passed away 2 years ago, and then that's when it really, really hit that I was gonna have to make it on my own. And Tim was a real, business-minded person, and I really saw firsthand the difference in being raised in a home where everybody generation had businesses. So his family came from insurance, sales, they were salesmen. And so he had that background. He had a certain set of expectations. He knew how to go out and do marketing. He had the drive, the oomph, money like speed. I was just telling these guys last night. And Tim was all about that. When he passed away, that torch was handed to me, and all that, gusto that I didn't have the first time around before I met Tim, I now put into my business. So yeah, it had been hard, and now that I'm incorporating, I mean, YouTube is wonderful, I swear, YouTube, listening to sales pitches, Bob Proctor's, Grant Cardone, a lot of stuff, and then the abundant artists. There are a lot of art organizations now that have videos that are teaching people to be art business, learning how to be professional. South Carolina Arts Commission is starting a new initiative called Arts Grow, networking. I mean, I go to 1 Million Cups every week, whether it's in Columbia. So it's me doing the drive, and I think if you do that drive and you improve your craft, then you can make it, period. Because if it's not selling, you gotta keep moving.
I think for me, every time I came to a crossroad in my life, and I always did consider some phase of art, I rejected it and stayed with the library work, which was stable, because I had a daughter and I had to raise her, and so I had to have steady income, and I waited until the time that I could venture into art, because I really loved art, I love what I do, but I make stable investments so that when I can do art, I can fluctuate financially.
And I guess for me, I'm a little bit more daring, or have been, or when I started out and decided that this is what I wanted to do, money be damned. And I was
You adjust your lifestyle.
You do, right. You know, I was in 2010, my grandmother passed, and a week after kind of healing through that, I was let go. And I said, I will never work for anybody else again. And that's when I jumped out on my own. Fought through foreclosure, almost lost my house. And the desk piece that we showed earlier, the one that came from the plantation, did that for a client, and we were going back and forth for price. And I knew the value of it, and I wasn't willing to go down. I didn't have enough money to withdraw from the bank. I go in the last day with the contract saying, this is my final price, and we'll see what happens. I had $17 in my pocket, but the rest I could not withdraw. And I went in that day, negotiated like I had all the money in the world, and came out with the contract. And I haven't looked back since.
My question was exactly what you just addressed, but I remember speaking to somebody who was a fine furniture maker, their high-end pieces, and he said unequivocally, I spend 50% of my time in my craft, and I spend 50% of my time in my business.
Right.
Because you can't just do craft.
Right.
And so that really struck me, and I think that's probably what I'm hearing you say. Any other questions?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to hear from Ms. Viola and Mr. Harrison about being black and an artist and what that looks like and how people treat you, and you know, being in the I live in the River Arts District, and yeah, there's not many black people walking through there, much less the artists being there, and like the perceptions of things being inferior or lesser quality, and like how does that play out as you being a black man and negotiating, and I wanted to hear more about that from y'all. So.
When I was the first, one of the first black artists in the River Arts District, and now it's only two. Joseph is there, and we both in the Pink Dog. And so when we have a lot of out-of-towners who come through, and whenever they were coming to my space, they would ask me, they probably thought I was just a clerk or a stand-in for someone. And they said, well, do you make this? I said, yes. You make this? I said, yes, I make this. And I think my work stands for itself in terms of quality. So then I tried to do a step, you know, in marketing. You have to market. So then I stepped up to try to take more photographs, have black models model my jewelry, have their picture forefront in my studio. So even if I'm not there, they walk into that space. They know it's somebody black owns this space right now. So I had my picture done with my jewelry.
Yes.
They know that's me right there too. So they know somebody black owns it and makes it, and somebody black is also mama.
It's been a commitment for me, starting out in the architecture profession. There's not a large representation, or that wasn't my experience. I can name one black architect that I worked with in the 23 years that I've been doing this. And to date, I can probably name, maybe 10 that I've engaged. Through that has its challenges, being the only face everywhere you go, every time. The first large installation that I showed, that was the wall installation, the steel door, and the conference table. My introduction to the construction team was less than stellar. That construction company, it's probably, I think it's the third largest general contracting firm in the state of South Carolina. The project manager for that job is going around introducing everyone. This person's doing this, yada, yada, yada. This is JD, he's just here to do whatever the owner wants. That was my introduction. I didn't say anything. This was my first big step. I just sat back and I said, okay. I didn't change my attitude, but my work changed theirs. And so by the time the project had ended, all of those same scrunched up faces were coming up to me saying that they had never seen anything like that before. And I just said, and move on, because at some point you have to. You can't fight ignorance with ignorance. You just try to stay above it.
There was a question in the back.
I would just like to know if at any point in your past did you have a mentor, and would you consider being a mentor to youth of color that are interested in being artists?
Excellent question.
I didn't really have a mentor, but I would be glad to mentor any young person that would be interested in doing jewelry.
I would say that actually my boyfriend Tim was my mentor, and right now, and I've always been a mentor, not necessarily for business, but as an engineer I was a mentor, and now I'm starting to do work with the Sisterhood, which is girls that are having been kicked out of school and they're at that last school before they end up in the Department of Juvenile Justice. But I have taught at the Department of Juvenile Justice tile making. I've taught with kids all my life. And because what I feel like is every kid needs to know that you are going to be responsible for your own financial freedom, and it's never too early to learn that. So I try to do that at all times, yeah.
And I would be willing to be a mentor. I can speak to several people who it wasn't necessarily about the craft or the profession, but just took time out. And so to instill that belief that there's no one thing that belongs to a particular group of people. You can do, you're only limited by yourself. And so I think that's something, especially for children, to hear that and gain that exposure, so that carries them when they even start to doubt themselves, that they know that there's someone who has told them, you deserve that, go get it.
And I'm really glad that you asked that question, because that's my dream, to come up with a way across this region. And I have a bias, because again, places like Chicago, Charlotte, Atlanta have all kinds of network of support for young people and creativity. But where it's least expected, that's not done. And I also will say that for the benefit of it being lucrative for us, because we can go ahead and talk about that, we need to be in places like Asheville where there is a tourist market, a consistent tourist market where high quality work is available. Because having been in higher ed for 20 some odd years, I now work at a technical college. So I've kind of come full circle to a certain extent, thinking about my uncles in particular that always made things, and my father doing antique cars. That was my first introduction to art, was going to those car shows. And not everybody is gonna go to college. Not everybody wants to take on debt to go to college. So there are other ways that you can make a good living. And, you know, I hear now this Affrilachia thing, you know, it's like, oh, it's a movement. Well, it could be a movement, and that would be my dream.
I keep feeling like we need a place to all speak, a gallery, something, a name on it, folks can sit down.
Well, I think there's enough minds and hearts and desire in this room to make it happen. And like I said, I know that that is actually, you know, our intent is not to just present in terms of saying, oh, isn't this interesting, isn't this wonderful, but, you know, we can put together collective effort. When you think about it, seriously, you know, with the Harlem Renaissance, what did that do? It launched people's careers. When those musicians came together, didn't even know each other, and went to the Black Banjo gathering in App State, they had no idea that they were going to launch their career and win a Grammy and launch careers individually as they branched off from each other as the Carolina Chocolate Drops. So we're only limited by our dreams because we've got our ancestors who sure showed us how to do it right. Okay? So thank you so much for your time. I have enjoyed it because I just got to sit back and enjoy. So everybody has business cards available to distribute to each of you. Come by and say hello. Thank you.
We're gonna take a super short break and just have a short transition and have Larry Thomas speak to us right before we watch the What Happened to Simone film.